a lot of them. We can be like, all right, everything we talk about in this lecture, some of the stuff you'll have to watch on your own, and the stuff we go through on Thursday, they all contain RNA as their main genetic material, which doesn't really narrow it down, just like saying a gram-negative rod doesn't really narrow it down too much. So we group them by their RNA, but then we also group them a little bit by what is their RNA structure. Some viruses have all of their RNA as one big long strand of RNA, and some of them have it in segments. So you'll see some things listed as segmented RNA. We group them whether they have an envelope or not, which is why even on that flow chart, which is my next slide too, that I handed out, sometimes you'll see, is it enveloped or is it naked? It's kind of naked is because it doesn't have an envelope on the outside. Some of them we group based on the size of the virus, which is going to be our big first family we talk about, as well as the shape, because some of them are uniquely shaped. So I'm like, we use these things to group them. And then of the there are 4 types of RNA that a virus can have. So it's like it has RNA, but there are 4 different ways you can have RNA if you are a virus. One, you could have a single-stranded RNA, but it's the positive strand. Now, it was like a few lectures ago we talked about. If you have a positive strand, single-stranded RNA, this is the strand that can get directly read by a ribosome, and it can make protein. Remember the central dogma, DNA to RNA to protein. If you have the single-stranded RNA, that really is the positive strand, and it can get directly made into the protein. But we do have a group of RNA viruses that have the positive strand, but instead of taking that positive strand and making protein with it, they take that positive strand and they go backwards and make double-stranded DNA out of it. They're called retroviruses. The word retro means backwards or in reverse. So they do what's known as reverse transcription. Then there's a group of viruses that don't have the positive strand, they have the negative strand, which means if they need to make proteins, because they do, they have to make a template, which is the opposite strand, and it's from that template that proteins get made. And then there's a really small group, which I think is like way up in the top right of the big flow chart we end with on Thursday, is one tiny little group that has double-stranded RNA, which that is also super unique. Generally single-strand, or RNA is always single-stranded. It could be positive, it could be negative, or it could do that reverse, but it's generally positive, or generally single-stranded. Sorry. That's a viruses we go through. Sorry, your little flow chart is not color-coded. You can color it if you want. But I just tried to group them, and I tried to break up the colors, again, kind of how we organize them. And we are going to start at our top left with those blue. They're all positive-sense single-stranded RNA, but they're naked. They don't have an envelope. And then we'll talk about the ones that do have an envelope. Then we'll get into those ones that do the reverse transcription. And then we get into those negative strand, whether they're enveloped or not, and then whether they have segmented RNA or it's like one long continuous strand of RNA. So we are going to start at the top left and eventually work our way over to the top right. I'm like, you've got that flowchart in front of you in case you're like, where the heck are we again? How are they all grouped together? So starting with our first group, which is that blue, naked, so they don't have an envelope, positive sense, single-stranded RNA, and we have 4 families. And because of all the viruses that are in this blue area that we're going to tackle first, I also kind of put it up here because it starts to get confusing how they get grouped and organized together. So there are 4 families. There's a Picorna family, Picornaviridae family, Calyciviridae, Astroviridae, and a Hepaviridae. Are the 4 big families of naked, positive sense, single-stranded RNA. Now, the Picornaviridae family is mainly grouped based on its size. The word pico means small. So this is why they call it a piccolo, which just means small flute. So pico means small. They are the smallest of the RNA viruses that cause human diseases. So these are ones we did not see until we had some advanced microscopes. And because of all the human pathogens, there are a lot of them in this Picornaviridae family. We're going to tackle 3 groups of them. So these are like 3 groups under the Picornaviridae family. Cheliciviridae, Astroviridae, and Hepaviridae are grouped together. We talk about them together mostly because they cause similar diseases and are spread the similar way. And they're also grouped based on their shape. The ones in these family look almost like they've got a star-shaped look to it. The word astro means star, like asteroids, means a star. So they're kind of grouped based on their diseases that they cause, which all attack the intestinal tract, and they're grouped based on their size. So we're going to get into these, but we're going to start first with the Picornaviridae family. And because, yes, there's lots of human pathogens in there, this will take us a little while. But we're going to start with the very first one that's in the Picornaviridae family, and it's the whole family of rhinoviruses. Now, generally, if you think of rhino, you're probably thinking of a rhinoceros. Well, the word rhino means nose. Again, it's the rhinoceros because it's got that big old horn on its nose. That's where it got its name. Well, rhinoviruses affect the upper respiratory tract, aka your nose. They are very infectious viruses. Literally, they just need one virus to get in the body, and you're going to get sick from it. The good news is it generally doesn't cause any severe complications. Rhinoviruses are the #1 cause of the common cold. And so your general common cold symptoms, runny nose. Like that's the #1 thing. I've got a cold, I got a runny nose again, and I swear there's tons of that going around right now. Otherwise, it's runny nose, congestion, cough. It's all upper respiratory issues, symptoms. And part of the main reason is this virus reproduces best and fastest if it's a little colder than body temperature. So our body temperature is 37 degrees Celsius. This virus really would prefer it and grows best and fastest at about 33 degrees Celsius. And so your nose, which is constantly breathing in that outside air temperature, is a wonderful environment for this virus to get in, take hold, and start reproducing like crazy. How it's transmitted, it can be transmitted through aerosols, so when someone coughs on you. It can be transmitted by touching inanimate objects, so if someone coughed, sneezed, whatever, they blew their nose, didn't wash their hands, touched the table, then you touched the table. In contact is generally the #1 way they're spread. So again, it's wash your hands. Someone blows their nose, a little bit on their hands, they didn't wash their hands, you shook their hands again, or they touched something, then you touched it directly right afterwards. With rhinoviruses is we do start to develop some immunity to rhinoviruses. So the older you get, you generally get less rhinovirus infections. So they say generally infants, young children can easily have 6 to 8 rhinovirus infections a year. I swear, like you look at kids, they always have a runny nose, like all the time. They're sick all the time. By the time you get to like elderly age, you maybe get 1 or 2 a year. So we do start to develop some immunity to them. Problem is, there's over 150 rhinoviruses that we know of, and they're constantly mutating and changing just a little bit. So although you're developing some immunity, the viruses are changing as well, and then you have to develop immunity to those. Now with rhinoviruses, diagnosing, if you were going to go to the doctor for a cold, they're generally just going to ask for your symptoms. Oh, you have a runny nose, you're congested. Okay, there you go. They just go based on the basic symptoms that you have. Treatment, there's not a lot of treatments. We do have something called pleconorol or picovir. Again, it's named for it's a picovirus. That if you take it really early at the onset of symptoms, it can decrease how long you have the cold. But most of the time, it's just over-the-counter medications to relieve the symptoms. Anti-decongestant. If you've got any kind of, fever maybe associated with and maybe some aches or anything associated with it, you just take cold medicine. Prevention, though, because it is so commonly spread from, just touching, person-to-person contact, hand washing is easily the #1 way to avoid colds. Although I was just reading, it was like a month ago, I was reading something about rhinoviruses as well as some other viruses. So a lot of viruses, not a lot. I was going to say some rhinovirus or some viruses do like a colder temperature that our nose provides. That we actually during COVID saw a huge decrease in the number of rhinoviruses, and it wasn't just because we sat there and were like no one went in everywhere. They did some studies on mask wearing. Lots of different studies for mask wearing. But one of the things is when you wear a mask, it generally stays warmer underneath that mask. And because your nose stays warmer, it makes certain viruses not quite as happy. And so wearing a mask and keeping that nose a warmer environment can prevent some viruses from reproducing, but your immune system cells also work better when they're warmer, when they're body temperature. So it's one of those, okay, so you not making certain viruses happy with that happy colder temperature underneath that mask, but you're also keeping your immune system cells super happy so that if certain things are getting into the nose, it can fight them off faster. So it's kind of like some benefits of wearing masks. And you're just picking up less stuff. Although no one wears masks anymore. Now, the enterovirus, I drew lines for a reason. The enteroviruses are also a big group. So again, under the P. coronaviruses and these small little viruses, we have enteroviruses. And if you remember, anything that has the enter in its name generally means intestine. That's what the word entero means. It does not mean for this group that these viruses affect the intestine. They're grouped together because they're all spread fecal-oral. So viruses get into the intestinal route, they're excreted through the body in the fecal matter, and then they're picked up fecal-oral. Once they get into the body, so you ate something that had some poop in it or drank some water that had some poop in it, they can get past the cells of the pharynx, they can get past the cells of the intestine, they get into the blood supply, and they will kill host cells. And that's the job of a virus, to infect cells, kill them. There are three main enteroviruses. Again, there are more enteroviruses we don't talk about. Three main enteroviruses that you may have heard of and some you may not have. One are the polioviruses, the Coxsackie virus, heard of the virus names, and some people have heard more of the diseases or issues that they're caused. So my guess is you probably have never heard of Coxsackie viruses before, but my guess is you're going to know one of the disorders that it can cause once we get there. So starting with our first of the enteroviruses, which is the poliovirus, which causes the disease known as poliomyelitis. And I like to break apart words. Itis means inflammation. Myelo talks about the myelin sheaths of our nervous system. And then polio is named for the virus name itself. So we just shorten poliomyelitis because that's just a mouthful to say. We just call it polio. Now, again, textbook editions. I'm like, you guys are on the 11th edition textbook. Just got the new one that's supposed to start out this fall, I think. And it's a little more updated, even with polio. So according to your update, your edition. Again, my note with micro textbooks, by the time a textbook hits my desk for the newest edition, it's already outdated. Because there's always stuff in the news, like always, which is why I'm putting on the announcements and adding stuff to PowerPoints. They're always updated. So based on your edition, the last case of polio in the United States was 1979. That is no longer the case. We just had a case of polio last summer in New York. So 2022 is the last known case of polio. Luckily for us, it was only one case of someone in New York. However, maybe you saw the news or heard the news because all last fall, they were testing the sewage water in New York. Why they were testing the sewage water? Well, this is a virus. It's all in this whole group of enteroviruses. They're all spread fecal-oral. So it's like, all right, well, if someone in New York has polio, they're going to go to the bathroom. They're going to flush the toilet. And they're looking to see, where is this particular virus? If this one person had it in New York, maybe other people in New York had it. So they were testing sewage water for the DNA, RNA, for the genetic material for this virus, and they were finding it. So there's probably other cases of polio that haven't been diagnosed yet in New York. As of right now, nothing local, but still, it's back. It's back in the United States. Now, 4 conditions, if you pick up this virus, that you may encounter. The first one, luckily, is the most common one, asymptomatic, which again, yes, they are detecting the genetic material in the sewage water in New York, and there could be a large number of people that are asymptomatic. I want to say 88. I don't care about them. Like, I'm not going to test you on the number. 90% of those that pick up this virus are asymptomatic. It's like, awesome, you have no symptoms. But again, if you don't have symptoms, you don't get tested, you don't get isolated, and you can easily be spreading the virus, as what they're assuming is happening in New York. About 5% develop what's known as minor polio, and this is going to be almost more cold flu-like symptoms. They're going to have fever, muscle aches, tired, and then it will go away with generally no long-lasting issues. But about 3% have what's known as and I say about, this changes slightly a little bit. About 3% have what's known as non-paralytic polio, which means they're all going to have all those minor polio symptoms. They're tired, body aches, think they have the flu, but they're going to have muscle spasms, which means the neurons, the myelin sheaths that are on the neurons that are affecting the skeletal muscles are becoming affected. So it's not just flu-like symptoms, now it's also causing issues with muscle tissue. And then about 2-ish% undergo what's known as paralytic polio, which means skeletal muscles become paralyzed. Now, we talked about this when we talked about the botulism as well as the tetanus. Those toxins cause either paralysis or a full sustaining contraction of skeletal muscle, and one of the most important skeletal muscles we have is the diaphragm. And if that becomes paralyzed, as it will in this, if your diaphragm becomes paralyzed, what will happen to you? You can't breathe, and then you die. So I'm going to put a little video online too that's really cool. I'm going to explain this picture because you maybe have heard of them or seen pictures of what are known as the iron lungs. So we knew that in about 2-3%. And when we're talking, and you're like, well, that's not a huge percent. Well, let's talk about like 50,000 people in La Crosse. It spread like wildfire once it got into different areas, and kids were the biggest ones. They're dirty, they don't wash hands. Were the biggest ones that were picking up this particular virus. And so, 50,000 people, if we have, say, 10,000 of the people in La Crosse and 2 to 3% of them developed paralytic polio, that's still a lot of people just in one city. So 2 to 3% doesn't sound like a lot. It's a lot of people that all develop what's known as paralytic polio, and kids were the biggest ones that were infected. They're dirty. Now, because it paralyzes that diaphragm, ultimately you would die, and kids were dying of this. So they were eventually, when we got enough technology, developed something known as the iron lung. It looks like a big old tube. I don't know if I've got another picture of a bigger one, a little bit bigger one. It looks like a big old tube. Your head's stuck out the end. That's all it is. The idea for the iron lung is while your body was fighting off the infection, because it could, but not before you died, it's like, well, let's put them in here to help with the breathing. And what ended up happening is this big, huge tube that all it stuck out was your head, and it was sealed up around your neck, is that tube did the breathing for you. Because your diaphragm just creates pressure differences as it changes shape. The pressure difference, air goes in, pressure difference, air goes out. Well, this iron lung caused pressure to build up around the body, which pushed on the body and air came out. Then it would decrease pressure, causing your body to lift up, air goes in. And so the lung just kind of did what the diaphragm's supposed to do, creating pressure differences, causing you to breathe. They usually, I feel like I do have another picture. Up a little bit better. You can see the little boy on there. They usually gave you a mirror up on top so you could see what's going around you, and you would live in that iron lung for potentially weeks, if not months. And I'm going to put a video out that they did, I was going to say it came out a couple years ago, that there's still a guy that's living in an iron lung because he never fully recovered, and so his diaphragm never fully recovered from it. So he still has to live in an iron lung. So, not a great virus to have. This is just showing, again, this was updated, and like it's outdated, and I could not find a better map this morning to show that really, until recently, like 2022, we didn't have any cases here in the United States, but polio has not been eradicated. Like, we eradicated smallpox, that's why we don't get vaccinated for it anymore. We almost eradicated polio, almost, but it's back. And so we're starting to see more and more cases of it, so it never went away. And because no one really saw cases, you're like, even here in the United States, you're like, no one's had polio since 1979. I'm not going to vaccinate my kid. The chances of them getting it are very low. It's true, it is low. But if they do get it, well, they're going to be in an iron lung, and we don't even have iron lungs anymore because no one gets it. Even that one guy in the video has issues. Who fixes these things? So luckily, the cases are going down or unvaccinating, and so cases are now starting to go back up. Main reason why we just don't have cases anymore is we developed some really good vaccines. So, I forgot to get to that. Before I get to the vaccine, even if you survived polio, so you lived in an iron lung, your immune system eventually got rid of the virus, you started to heal, you could breathe on your own, you're like, yay, I lived. Generally, what happened to about 50% of the people that survived is all the muscles that were affected. So not just your diaphragm, but all of your skeletal muscles that were affected, like years earlier, start to deteriorate. Like the damage to those nerves that controlled your skeletal muscles was still damaged. Even if you came back and survived, later on, all of those nerves that control the skeletal muscle decline, and you develop what's known as post-polio syndrome. So it's just the damage to the skeletal muscles starts to become, I don't know the way to define it, becomes evident later on in life. And so it was not uncommon for people that had polio as a kid later on in life, and that's why I'm like, you guys might still have this if you work in nursing homes. Those that had polio as a kid, most of them are in a wheelchair. They've got, abnormalities in their legs. Sometimes I'm like, they could have, I know that's a child that has it, but they could have some deformities to their legs. Again, it's all the effects of the polio that they had as a child. Now, again, why it went away. We have two different polio vaccines. They both came out in the 1950s. I think one was 50s, one was 60s. Jonas Salk came out with the first one, the inactivated polio vaccine in 1955. You don't need to know the date, but just know, like, this is why if you're working in nursing homes or you're working with elderly in your future jobs, you may have patients that have had polio when they were younger, because this particular vaccine came out in 1955. Luckily, I'm like, it was a very good vaccine, very effective, and because infants and children, because they're dirty and don't wash hands, were the number one group of peoples that usually picked up polio, parents got their kids vaccinated. Like, it was a very common vaccine. There were lines out the door of some of these different institutions to try to get vaccinated. Salk is so famous for it, he even has his own Salk Institute that named for him because it was such just like a needed vaccine. Sabin came along 1961, and came out with the oral polio vaccine. Now, differences between that. The inactivated polio vaccine is they took the virus, they completely inactivated it, so it can't cause any kind of virus, but it is a shot, and kids don't like shots. And so Albert Sabin came along, he's like, I'll do the oral, just kind of like you can have the nasal, even with the flu vaccine. I'll do an oral polio vaccine, which most kids are like, I would like that one, and chose that one. The issues with the oral polio vaccine, it is a live attenuated virus. So they took the virus, they shot it with some radiation, they made it so that it can't cause the disease anymore, but it is still a live virus. Super effective, because again, live organism, causes a stronger immune response, and it does have a stronger immune response. The problem with it, it's still a live virus, and viruses like to mutate. And so there was, I can't remember the date, it was like 20 years ago. But 20 years ago, I think over in Europe, there was an outbreak of polio. And they noticed everyone that had developed polio had just gotten vaccinated. And it's because the virus itself had mutated to go from an inactivated can't-cause disease form to an active-causing disease. And so in the United States, we do not, and we have not for at least 20 years now, we do not do the oral polio vaccine. However, just because of that slight risk that it could mutate, a lot of other countries still give the oral inattenuated vaccine. I was reading this morning as I was trying to find headings and news articles. Our latest case, last summer in New York, the person that had picked up the polio, he was unvaccinated, which is why they had the symptoms and got diagnosed. The virus that he picked up was actually a mutated strain that came from this particular vaccine, because they can do genetic tests and they can figure out how things mutated. And so over somewhere in Europe, somewhere not in the United States, the virus that was put into the vaccine that was unattenuated has mutated, over the past year or two, and it became a living, viable virus that can cause polio. So I'm like, it is possible. Again, if we could just get rid of it, we would decrease it. The chances of that ever happening. Next group in the enteroviruses, again, these are all spread fecal oral, so they're all enteroviruses, is the Coxsackie A viruses and the Coxsackie B viruses. Why it gets a weird name is a lot of times viruses are named after where they're discovered, and there is actually a city called Coxsackie, is it New Jersey? I wrote it down. New York. And so that's where it was first discovered, named, and so it gets a weird name. So the Coxsackie A viruses and there are Coxsackie B viruses. They both are in the same group. They are both genetically very similar to each other, but Coxsackie A viruses generally cause less severe signs and symptoms than Coxsackie B viruses. So Coxsackie A viruses usually cause lesions on the skin as well as fevers. And so some of you may have heard of, maybe not Coxsackie viruses, but you may have heard of some of the disorders that the diseases are called. So one is called herpangina, and this just means you have sores around the mouth. And it's called herpangina is because it resembles herpes. And so just like cold sores, you get sores around the mouth. Well, herpangina, you get sores around the mouth, but it's not a herpes virus, but it's like similar in its signs and symptoms. Some of you may have heard of hand, foot, and mouth disease, which spreads like crazy in daycares. Again, kids are dirty. These are all spread fecal oral. Acute hemorrhagic conjunctivitis, which means you got a really bad case of pink eye, but it's a viral pink eye. So you don't have all the gunky stuff in there. It's just a viral pink eye. And some of the Coxsackie A viruses cause common colds. Of things that can cause common colds. Coxsackie B viruses can still cause similar symptoms to Coxsackie A. You can still have some of the lesions on the skin. You can still have fevers. But Coxsackie B viruses can also cause more severe effects because it can get in and cause myocarditis or pericardial infections. So it's not super uncommon. You probably, if you're nursing, will probably have at some point in your career, you'll have patients that have a viral pericardial infection. It just means they've got fluid around the heart. It's causing a lot of pain. They'll probably think they were having a heart attack. And they're just thinking, oh, it's just a virus that'll go away on its own. And trust me, your patients are going to be like, what? Like, what do you mean? I think I'm having a heart attack. I've got a ton of pain around my heart. Well, it's just caused by Coxsackie B virus, and just kind of like the common cold, it will go away on its own, and it generally doesn't have any long-lasting effects, but it does cause inflammation of the heart in that pericardial sac. Can, in rare cases, cause meningitis. That's just an inflammation of the meninges. Just like pneumonia is a very generic term, meningitis is a very generic term. Lots of things can cause it. And then the last of the enteroviruses is the echovirus. Echoviruses can cause more common colds. Lots of things can cause the common cold, as well as, in rare cases, meningitis. It's called echo. It was named for entero, because they knew it was spread fecal oral. Cytopathic, forgot what the H stands for, orphan. Because they knew it was a virus, they just didn't know what it caused for a long time until they eventually started realizing it was causing the common colds and meningitis. Human orphan, that's what the H stood for. Now, most enteroviruses, again, they're all spread fecal oral, are usually not diagnosed unless severe cases. Like polio is going to be a severe case of an enterovirus. If you've got some type of meningitis, some type of, pericardial infection, yeah, you're probably going to get it diagnosed. But most of the time, it's common colds, hand, foot, and mouth disease. I just had a student in one of my online things. She's like, this was such an informative lecture, because they're learning the same thing as you guys, and they're like, because my kid right now has hand, foot, and mouth disease. I'm like, it goes around, it's daycares like crazy. Most are not diagnosed. Even if you took your kid into the doctor and they're like, it's hand, foot, and mouth disease, can they do anything for you? No, they're going to send you a bill. But there's really nothing you can do. So a lot of times you don't even get diagnosed because there's really nothing you can do for it. It's keep them comfortable, and that's about it. So treatment, we have no effective antiviral therapies. We have, it's, again, try to keep you comfortable. If you've got a fever, give an anti-fever. But we don't have any kind of antivirals for any of these. Your best bet is just, don't get them in the first place. Most of them, because they're spread fecal oral, good hygiene, washing hands, adequate sewage treatment. Luckily, we lived in a very developed country, lots of sewage treatment facilities, and we do have a vaccine for polio. Very effective. Our next group, still in the Picornaviridae, still super small, it's the hepatovirus group, and anything hepat means liver, and so one of our next hepatitises, because there's an A, B, C, D, and E, is hepatitis A. So hepatitis A it's still grouped because it's still super small. It's still grouped based on its naked positive sense single-stranded RNA. But it is unique enough not to be an enterovirus, genetic-wise, but it is still spread fecal oral. Most hepatitis viruses are not spread fecal oral. So it's unique for this particular hepatitis that it is spread fecal oral. Because it is spread fecal oral, it is one of the hepatitises, the main hepatitis, that can get picked up by eating various foods. And so a lot of times if you ever hear about recalled foods due to hepatitis, just be like, oh, I bet it's hepatitis A, because there's an A, B, C, D, and E that affect us. Signs and symptoms, well, it is spread fecal oral, and this one can cause digestive issues. So a lot of times it can cause nausea. Otherwise, it's a hepatitis. It's going to cause inflammation of the liver. And so you're going to have abdominal pain right where that liver is. It can develop into jaundice if it's a more severe liver inflammation. And then you're usually going to have some nausea, sometimes vomiting with it. Luckily, it usually doesn't cause any chronic liver issues. It goes away on its own, usually in a couple weeks. And most 99% plus have a complete recovery. It's pretty much you ate some bad food and you got sick from it. Luckily for us, you can get vaccinated. We do have hepatitis A vaccines, so then you don't have to worry about that one, fecal oral. I mean, still wash your fruits and vegetables. But I was looking, I was going to say this is the most recent one I had. What was it? Last month, there was a big outbreak of hepatitis A on frozen organic strawberries. Again, organic means, they're using different ways of fertilizing without using, the basic nitrogen fertilizers, and a lot of times when you have organic fertilizer, what do they usually use? Manure, fecal oral. And so a lot of times, a lot of foods are recalled due to hepatitis. It's because a lot of times it's the organics. It's because they were fertilized with manure, and they weren't washed properly somewhere in the collection and bagging of them. On here, because again, we are going to talk, there is a hepatitis A, B, C, D, and E. Out of the 5 hepatitises, only one has DNA that we talked about on Thursday. That was hepatitis B. It would be so nice if Hepatitis D had DNA. They both have a D, but it doesn't work that way. Hepatitis B had DNA. And then we just got done talking about hepatitis A, so we still have to get through C, D, and E. So working our way through our blue, naked, positive sense single-stranded RNA, we got through the Picornaviridae family, hence it's a big list up there. We got through all of those. Now we're going to move on to the Cheliciviridae and the Astroviridae, which we group right together. And we group them together because of their distinct shape. They look a little bit more star-like. This is an actual picture with an electron microscope. They look a little more star-like. And they both cause very similar diseases. They both affect the intestinal tract. They're both going to cause gastroenteritis, acute gastroenteritis. This just means inflammation of the stomach and the intestines, leading to vomiting and diarrhea. So these two viruses look alike. They both cause very similar conditions. Genetically, they are unique. The caliciviruses cause diarrhea, nausea, and vomiting. Astroviruses generally just do the diarrhea. Very rarely do they cause vomiting, but they're both affecting and causing inflammation of the intestinal tract. There are lots of strains of caliciviruses and astroviruses. So it's not just one calicivirus. There's not just one astrovirus. It's its own little group, and there's lots of strains of them. One of the more commonly known strains of caliciviruses are the norovirus strains. And why the norovirus strains are more common, they're nicknamed the cruise ship virus, but they also hit a lot of daycares, they hit a lot of nursing homes, they hit a lot of medical facilities. Although I'm not gonna lie, and it's like knock on some wood, that's not, I'm sure there's wood behind there. It's been a while since I've heard about an outbreak at a nursing home. Now, do some of you guys work at nursing homes? I was gonna say, have you guys heard of any outbreaks recently? I was going to say, I haven't either. On some wood, because usually at this time, I usually have one student, you're like, oh my God, last month it was like full shutdown, isolation. It's like almost back into COVID before we had COVID regulations that would keep everyone confined. It's spread fecal-oral. I mean, it's, it's technically an entero-type virus, but it's spread very, very easily with anything that's touched. It's very easily picked up. It's not only spread fecal-oral, it can also be spread even with coughing, any type of fluid the virus can be in. And it takes a very small dose. So pretty much you pick up that virus from anywhere and you're gonna have vomiting and diarrhea. Now, they call it the cruise ship viruses because on cruise ships you have a lot of people in a very closely defined area, and they're all touching the same things. They all go through the same food lines. They all are going through the same hallways. They're all frequenting the same thing. Everyone touching everything. And trust me, if you just spend a ton of money for a cruise ship, the last thing you want to do your entire cruise is spend it in the bathroom vomiting and diarrhea. It's not a great vacation. So some of our biggest outbreaks, daycare, schools, hospitals, nursing home. There is no treatment except treat the symptoms. It will go away on its own. It's just replace the fluids and electrolytes that are lost. Otherwise, best prevention, sewage treatment, making sure that infected fecal matter gets treated, hand washing, disinfecting surfaces so that you're not touching surfaces that other people touched and laid that virus down. Trying to find like news article. This one came out last month that, yay, more and more noroviruses are spreading faster this past winter than it was the winter prior. It's like, oh, yay. But luckily, I haven't heard any big cases here locally about any big outbreaks. And then our last little group of naked positive sense single-stranded RNA is the HEPA virus. And anything that hep or hepat is liver. So this is a virus that causes hepatitis E. Again, we got 5 hepatitises. One's E. Now, hepatitis E is an enteric hepatitis, which means it is picked up fecal-oral. And for most individuals, asymptomatic, like 99% asymptomatic, or you might have some some digestive issues, some minor liver inflammation, pain in the liver, and it will go away on its own without any long-lasting effects. The problem is In pregnant women, this particular virus seems to grow like crazy and cause more damage than anyone else. They think, they're not 100% certain for the correlation, because they're not going to like go around asking pregnant women to infect them with hepatitis E. They think it's the increase in hormones stimulates the virus to reproduce. And so pregnant women with that increase in hormones that they have is almost a trigger for this particular virus, and this particular virus in pregnant women is fatal in about 20% of pregnant women. It's not great odds. Luckily, we don't generally have a lot of cases of it. And for most other people, it's no issues. It will go away on its own. Just treat any of the symptoms that you may have. Best is just not get it in the first place, because it is fecal oral, sewage treatment, good hygiene, washing hands, all of that. Again, I don't think I found any articles. I'm like, I haven't seen any outbreaks. Again, I swear when I talk about these things is when I start to see them. I haven't seen any outbreaks of hepatitis E lately. We don't have a vaccine for it, though. Luckily for most people, no long-lasting issues, and the cases numbers are pretty low. Our next group, positive sense single-stranded RNA, but they all have an envelope. So they all have that outer barrier. I'm not going to write any more on the board, but the ones you may have heard of, recently, we've got toga viruses, flaviviridae, which we're going to get into, and then there's the whole group, the coronaviridae, which you may have heard of now. When I first started lecturing about it, before 2020, I'm like, it was never an issue. People were like, never heard of it, never heard of coronaviridae before. My hope is to get through these guys today. So these are all enveloped. They all have an outer envelope that they stole from their host cell, and they're all positive single-stranded RNA. The togaviridae and the flaviviridae are usually grouped together, discussed together, and mostly because the majority of them are spread by arthropods, insects. Not all of them, but most of them are. They're also grouped because of the shape of their outer capsid. It's an icosahedral shape, so a cool big, not circular, but a cool geometric shape to them. Again, most, we'll talk about one that's not, are arboviruses. And arbo does not mean trees like Arbor Day. Arbo means insects or arthropods. So a lot of these viruses are spread by insects. Even some around here. So that's why I was like, yay, it's going to be nice out. Ooh, I already saw flies out and other insects, but I don't think I've seen a mosquito yet. And then our coronaviridae, it's grouped based on the helical shape of the capsid it has. So first started talking about just what are arboviruses. Just means they're spread by insects. So the insects could be mosquitoes, which we got a lot of around here in the summer. They could be spread by ticks. We got those around here in the summer. They could be spread by lice. Biting flies can spread them. Pretty much if an insect that can bite us, it could be a carrier for some of these different viruses. Most of the viruses in these group just cause mild flu-like symptoms within about a week of infection, being tired, fatigue, headache, fever. But some of them can cause more severe infections they're called second stage infections. I'll get to that in a second, but they can cause more severe signs and symptoms, which we then name the diseases, called encephalitis, inflammation of the brain tissue, dengue fever, and yellow fever. Now they're called second stage infections. I'm gonna get back to because I just like this picture. They're called second stage infections because it's not the first time that you get bitten by a mosquito or another insect and get the virus that causes an issue. It's the second time that you get bitten by a mosquito and pick up that virus that causes the issues. And this is why. So the first time, this is just showing an example of dengue fever. This could be yellow fever or some of the other ones. The first time the virus gets in the body, you may get a slight fever, goes away on its own, but your immune system does what it's supposed to do, and it develops antibodies. So now you have antibodies. You're like, yay, I have antibodies. I should never have this virus again. In theory, mosquito like another month or two later, and that virus gets in the body, and the antibodies do what they're supposed to do. They recognize the virus, they attach it to it, and then you've got white blood cells that are like, okay, well, I'm going to clean that virus up. However, it can activate the breaking down of the antibodies that found that virus, can activate too many T cells. Almost wakes up too many of our immune system cells, And those too many activated T cells start to produce inflammatory cytokines. And it's that inflammation that our immune system triggers that causes hemorrhagic fever, shock, hemorrhagines, that's bleeding out internally, and death. It's an overactive immune response that causes all the severe conditions. So again, you want your immune system to work, but sometimes your immune system works too well and causes more severe symptoms. So it's not the first time you get bitten by something, it's the second and every other subsequent time after that. It's just the overactive immune response. This is just showing an example of one of the viruses that we do have here in the United States and even locally, known as West Nile virus. It's spread by mosquitoes. It used to not be here in Wisconsin or anywhere in the United States. It used to be over in Africa, but it's spread by mosquitoes. That's how we pick it up. But the virus usually hangs out in birds. Well, as birds migrated, they brought the virus with them, and then the mosquitoes feed on them, and then they feed on us, and they spread the virus to us. I've known cases, not of people directly, I guess. I had a student whose mom had West Nile virus that had a pretty bad case of it that was hospitalized. Most of the time, about 80% are asymptomatic. Usually about 20% have the fever, flu-like symptoms, but usually 1% or even less than 1% develop encephalitis. And that's what this particular student's mom had developed and was hospitalized for it. I'm only bringing it up. We do have cases in Wisconsin. I've got another map I found this morning. But it's one of the things that if you hear in the news this summer, a lot of times the DNR gets very concerned when a lot of birds are just found dead everywhere. You're like, oh my God, why are these dead birds found everywhere? It's not like they ran into a window or something else. This virus is found in birds, and it will kill birds. And so a big concern in the summer months is if you start finding a lot of dead birds everywhere, it could mean that the virus is here and we have an increased number of the virus in birds, which means there's an increased risk of mosquitoes eating the birds and spreading it to us. So a lot of times they do a lot of bird testings in the summer to see if the birds died of West Nile virus. I found this map this morning of the number and kind of areas, the counties, places in the United States that have cases of West Nile virus. I don't know if it has the year, though. That was my only thing. I couldn't see, like, oh, from this year to this year, these are the cases. Because I know the one student that I had, this was probably 15 years ago, 10 years ago. I don't even know anymore. Somewhere in there, I'm like, they were still in the La Crosse area. They were in Bergen County. But there's cases here. This one I found, this is the cases of West Nile virus here just in Wisconsin between the years of 2016 and 2020. So we do have cases here in Wisconsin. I'm like, it's here. There's not a lot of cases, but it's here. So these are some of the diseases that are caused by arboviruses. So these are all insect-carrying viruses. Again, we just went over the togaviridae and the flaviviridae, but these are some of the other ones we'll talk about either today still or next Thursday. We won't get through all of them. But looking at the list of some of the diseases that they cause, do any stick out to you? Or you recognize? Is that this lacrosse? Hey, there is an actual disease called La Crosse encephalitis, and it's because it was discovered. There was a boy that had picked it up from La Crosse that had died of it, and so it's named for La Crosse encephalitis. Yay! It's spread by mosquitoes. Yay for mosquitoes. It is, I was going to say, it seems to cause more severe signs and symptoms in children than it does in adults. And so a lot of adults are asymptomatic. A lot of kids usually develop fevers, but it can cause some more severe conditions like encephalitis that it can be deadly. It's not usually deadly. So I was like, here are the cases. Again, I don't have the years. The number of cases of La Crosse encephalitis that are found in the United States. So this is not all over United States virus for La Crosse encephalitis. And even La Crosse and Wisconsin is not the peak area where La Crosse encephalitis is found. Most cases of La Crosse encephalitis are a little bit more on the East Coast than they are here. But yeah, we've got cases here. And it's usually found in marshy type areas. We've got that here. And the mosquitoes usually pick it up. You know, they're breeding in those stagnant marshy waters. If you go out into those areas, it always puts you at risk. But yay, we're in the textbooks, guys. Now, most arboviruses, how we test for them is we use some type of ELISA, some type of serological test, but we really don't have any treatment. It's all supportive care. Like, we don't have a lot of viral treatments. It's not like antibiotics for bacteria. It's make them comfortable. If they've got a fever, give them anti-fevers. Your best bet is prevention. And how can you prevent an arbovirus infection? It's not don't ever go outside. I mean, that would be one way, but it's spread by mosquitoes. What can you do to prevent that? I was going to say bug spray. You know, don't go out at dusk when mosquitoes are crazy and put on long light colored clothing so you can see the mosquitoes, but you know, bug spray is going to be the biggest thing. We do have a few vaccines for some of the strains of arboviruses. We do have a vaccine for yellow fever, the strain that causes yellow fever. Luckily for us, most arboviruses, the highest number of cases are usually in tropical areas that usually cause the more severe issues. I mean, yes, we have La Crosse encephalitis. Yes, we have West Nile virus. There's so many other of these viruses that you just have higher number of cases as you start to go to tropical areas because you know, here we don't get bitten by mosquitoes like 6 months out of the year, so we just have less cases here. If you go places where they don't have freezing temperatures, more mosquitoes, more viruses. Another virus, it's in the Flaviviridae group, but it is not spread by mosquitoes. So although most are, not all. And it's rubella, which is nicknamed the German measles. Which is different from measles. We'll get to measles on Thursdays. But it's called the German measles or rubella. Virus not spread by insects, instead it's spread through respiratory droplets, so coughing, sneezing. Once it gets into the body, because someone coughed and sneezed on you, it spreads throughout the body and causes a widespread rash all over the body. And just like chicken pox, children to have less symptoms. You know, they have an annoying rash like chicken pox, but then it goes away on its own and usually no long-lasting effects. Adults, though, because they do have a stronger immune system, they're going to have a stronger immune response. This is just like chickenpox. It can put you in the hospital. They can have very severe fevers. It can develop into encephalitis. Our biggest issue, though, is pregnant women. And it's not because of pregnant women like hepatitis E that they suffer more severe complications. It's because this virus can get past that placental barrier, and it can cause a lot of issues in the child. And so if a pregnant woman picks up this particular virus, infants are known to have, it causes a lot of blindness, it causes deafness, it causes cognitive disabilities. It can cause some bodily malformations, that's rare, but a lot of blindness, deafness is caused from the mom having rubella. So it's not always about, I'm not going to vaccinate my kids and they'll be fine. You know, pregnant women really should be vaccinated for this. Luckily, it is a pretty common vaccine. Any guess what it's mixed with? MMR vaccine, which stands for measles, which we haven't gotten to, mumps, which we haven't gotten to, and rubella. And so the MMR vaccine is a pretty common vaccine, but it's not just let's vaccinate your kids. Let's make sure the adults are vaccinated, especially pregnant women, or get them vaccinated before pregnancy. We do have a very effective vaccine. It's not 100% effective. No vaccine ever is, but we do have a vaccine for it. This is just showing since we developed that vaccine, the number of cases of rubella, of course, has gone way down. But we are seeing some outbreaks and numbers going up is because we are not vaccinating at the rate we really should be. Our next group of virus that's not spread by insects at all is a hepatitis C. Yeah, we have A, B, C, and D. We've got through A, we got through B last class. We got through E. We still had hepatitis C. Hepatitis C causes about 20% of all hepatitis cases. It's spread, luckily it's not a fecal oral. It's spread usually through some type of bodily secretion or blood fluid. So shared needles, organ transplants, sexual activity can all spread hepatitis C. Before, we used to have safe tattooing and making sure needles weren't shared between tattoos. Hepatitis C was commonly spread. Now, it can cause very severe liver issues, and it's usually not right away. It's usually like decades later that the damage to the liver becomes prevalent. So severe liver damage, liver failure, those that have picked this up, never knew that they had it, probably are on the point where they're at the liver transplant list. Luckily, just in the last 5-10 years, we do have some treatments. We don't have a prevention. We don't have a vaccine yet, but they are working. But we do have some treatments that are actually quite effective. It's known as a protease inhibitor. We know that the virus needs this particular enzyme called protease in its replication cycle. And so if we can inhibit it, we can stop the virus from reproducing. And so for a lot of, I've seen advertisements for it. It's been a while. That, they're usually targeting kind of the older generation before we had cleaned everything and before we knew how to stop it from spreading. Targeting and advertising for various treatments for hepatitis C. The coronavirus family. It's my last one, and I don't have a lot of time because I recorded everything on COVID. It's named for the halo it has on the outside. It's named for all the little proteins that stick out, the little glycoproteins. The word corona means crown. It doesn't mean beer. So it means crown. This is why you even have a coronal suture, like on the top of your head, right where the crown would sit. It just means crown. So they say this little outside ring looks like a little crown around it. It's transmitted upper respiratory droplets. So someone coughing, sneezing, hence COVID is in this group. We're like, mask wearing. This is that you don't pick it up through inhalation and you don't spread it through that coughing and talking. Now, coronaviruses are a huge group. Yes, COVID is in there as well, the COVID-19, but it is the only thing. There are a ton of viruses in this family. A lot of the viruses in this family cause the common cold. So when COVID-19 came out, people were like, psh, coronavirus just caused the common cold. COVID-19 is no different. And I'm like, oh my God, stop. Because yes, different viruses. Like we can sit there and be like, enteroviruses, they're all spelled fecal oral. They're all in the same group. Virus is a whole lot different than other viruses. They're all in the same group because they all look alike, but they're all genetically different from each other. So a lot of viruses in this group cause the common colds. So rhinoviruses cause common colds. Coxsackie viruses cause common colds. Lots of things cause the common cold, but there are some viruses in this group that cause more severe issues. Now, before COVID-19 came out, the most well-known of them was the disease, or the virus that caused the disease, SARS, or severe acute respiratory syndrome, which its signs and symptoms were very similar to COVID-19, which triggered us right away to go right towards this particular family when we were testing the genetics, because it causes respiratory distress. That was the biggest thing, and right away that first strain of COVID-19 that came out causes severe damage to breathing. That's how people were dying. They could not get enough oxygen in the body to sustain life, and they died because of it. Well, that's what SARS did as well. So it caused fever, body aches, but it caused that respiratory distress. And SARS killed about 10% of those that picked up this particular strain. Luckily, we never here in the United States had big outbreaks of SARS. It was usually over in China, which for a long time, anytime they show pictures of China for decades, this was in the 1990s, everyone was always wearing masks. The Chinese knew what was going on. They wore masks because they were trying to prevent that SARS outbreak. There was also another one, and I'm starting to hear more cases of it, called MERS, the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, that actually is more severe, causes about 50% of deaths in individuals. Luckily, there's not a lot of cases, so it doesn't make the news, but I'm starting to hear more cases. And for any of the coronaviruses, we really had no treatments, and we don't have any vaccines. They are working on a SARS vaccine, and we do have a COVID-19 vaccine. But we don't have vaccines for all the strains of coronaviruses. Now, because COVID-19 is its own beast, I recorded its own. It's got its own separate little PowerPoint on the Blackboard. And it constantly changes. Like every time I recorded a lecture, I swear like 2 weeks later, it was completely different because we discovered new things about it right away. But I have a recording on that. So it's like between now and the next Thursday, and I'll put this in the announcement, your job is to watch 2 videos because I know I can't finish all of this on Thursday. So your job is to watch, skim through, read through the video on COVID-19. Some of it you're like, you know, I'm okay if you skip through stuff. Some stuff you're like, I've heard this so many times, I get it. You know, skim through, look for the stuff in that PowerPoint that you didn't know. You know, like what are some of the receptors? Why does it target certain cells? And then there's also a recording all about HIV. So this next group, the enveloped, positive sense, single-stranded RNA that do reverse transcription, I recorded this. So there's like a 40-minute lecture on COVID. Again, you can skim through the PowerPoint. You don't have to listen to the recording if you don't want. But at least listen through that HIV recording, which is 23 minutes. So that's like your 1 hour outside of lecture time for the class this week. There's no online quiz due before I see you Thursday, though. All right, thank you for letting me go a couple minutes over. Let me stop this and